Hello, everybody. Welcome to the show today. Today on the podcast, we have my good friend Petra. Petra is originally from the United States and has moved to Spain. It's been several years ago now. We met, I think, probably about 4 years ago. It's been. I'll have to ask her to see. But I'm super excited to have her on the show. She's got some great experiences, some things we haven't talked about with any of the other people that have moved so far. So really excited to have her here today. So if you haven't yet, please subscribe to our channel. That definitely helps, and then you can get all of the episodes as soon as they're out every week. I'm hoping in the future to move to every 2 weeks. So definitely subscribe, follow us. You can follow us on our social media channels as well. I'm on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, all of those things. So Global Citizen Life or the Global Citizen Life Consultant. It'll be one of those two on all of them. The links are always in the show notes below, so please join us. And without further ado, I will have Petra join us and tell us about her wonderful adventure so far from the United States to Spain. So welcome, Petra. Thank you very much for joining us today and sharing your journey from the United States to Spain with us and the types of things you went through. So thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
So I know about your background because we've known each other for a while now, but for our listeners, can you share what happened and what brought you to Spain and kind of how you chose Spain or why and how long you've been there?
Yeah, sure. I was living in New York City. Well, basically since I turned 18, I lived in New York City. I was born and raised in Montana and wanted to get as far away from there as possible. So I did that. For, probably the first 10 to 12 years, I really was in love with the city and that kind of lifestyle and the craziness. But at some point, I started, becoming a bit more stable and realizing maybe I want to buy property, maybe I want to do something. But, looking at a one-bedroom apartment on my street in a good neighborhood, and it was, just south of $1 million. And you're like, well, this is a bit ridiculous. So I kind of never had this idea that I would buy in New York. I thought it was too crazy, but I was itching to do something. Mm-hmm. So I started looking at where else I might buy a vacation rental or a rental property or something I could rent out. And that was kind of how it all started. And I had been to Spain a couple of times. I really loved it, but it wasn't the first place I thought of. I first immediately thought of places in the US, like ski resorts or, beach towns or something. But eventually started just got this idea to look at Barcelona because I had liked it so much as a tourist. I thought this is a place I would like to go, but I could also rent it out. It would be something that would make sense. So I started looking in a more serious way at what that would mean. I found that you could get a mortgage as a foreigner in Spain. I found that it was relatively easy to get a non-lucrative visa, which means you can't work, but you can be there. And it seemed like actually a lot of the barriers to entry weren't problems. Shortly after, because this was 2017 when I started looking at this apartment, well, Trump would get elected. And suddenly the thinking was more not just about this one, singular idea of like an apartment, but maybe it's a place I want to be more. Mm-hmm. Maybe I don't need, maybe it's not a part-time rental, vacation rental kind of thing, but it's something that I would consider doing full-time. So at this point, it started to become the goal, and I started taking kind of Spanish lessons, and I was going to Spain probably once every month at that point, just to try to acclimate, try to meet people, try to not be going in cold, the day of moving. But I basically put a deposit down on an apartment, and when the apartment was supposed to be done was kind of as I set my goal for that to be my moving date. So that's how it all started.
Okay, so then that I guess from New York to Barcelona, I'm not sure that kind of flight time, but that's still a lot of kind of back and forth travel that you were doing prior
Yeah.
to coming. But that's good. I mean, completely opposite of me. I was there for a week holiday, and I think on about day three, I decided this is a really good home base. I could do that, and I had a few other trips planned and back to Canada. And I think I went from Canada. I think I had a trip to either Costa Rica or the United States booked already. And then when I got back to Canada the next day, I was on a flight and been like, nope, Barcelona's home base now. And I went in pretty much completely cold, other than the 5 or 7 days that I was there prior to. So it was pretty much kind of sink or swim for me.
Yeah, it's amazing. A lot of people, Barcelona has that effect on them.
Hmm.
You hear
Hmm.
that a lot.
And it's good though, but because Barcelona too is very, very international.
Yes.
It's an easy place, I think, to move to meet people. There's so much going on, so many activities, so many things to do. So many expats from all over the world that it is a very easy place. It's not the cheapest place in Spain by any means.
Yeah.
But I guess that's kind of part of it. Everybody goes there, which makes the prices go up, but people go there because everybody goes there. So
Right.
so it,
Right.
it goes hand in hand. So when you decided to move, so you were taking some Spanish lessons, so you had some knowledge of Spanish prior to moving to Spain. And was it the same? Because there is a slight difference between Spanish in Spain and say Spanish from Central and South America.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I actually taken 4 years of Spanish in high school and later would date a Mexican for 4 or 5 years. And I never spoke to him in Spanish. I was too, honestly, I think the truth is I didn't actually know anything. I knew like a few vocab words, but we learned very little. And furthermore, growing up in Montana where there are no Hispanic people, whatever
Mm-hmm.
Spanish you were learning in school was very limited. So it was probably, to your point, yes, the more Latin American Mexican style Spanish, but even to that end, like the actual practice of it was nothing. So it was, reciting colors and numbers and things like that. So I actually, but it helped me think I knew Spanish,
Mm-hmm.
which helped me think I could live here, you
Right.
know?
Mm-hmm. And it's a bit of a confidence thing because
Yeah.
I do some tutoring of English, and people, when they think they're bad, it's just that confidence. And we call it kind of a competence loop, where the more confident you are, even if we're not good at it, if we're confident, we're willing to practice it more, to
Yeah.
use more, to speak more,
Yeah.
which then builds that practice and gets us better. When we're not confident, even if we are good, then we tend to not speak much. So we're not getting any better and we're not building up that confidence. So it's
Yeah.
good to have that, even if it's in hindsight, maybe a little bit of artificial confidence, but still it helps. It that confidence helps.
Yeah, and that was, it was not nothing, because I think if I was like, oh, I'm going to move to France, and to have to pick up as someone over 30 and learn French in a very difficult language to pronounce,
Mm-hmm.
that would have been different. So I think it helped me think enough to give me enough confidence, as you're saying, to dive in. And also, I think the other thing that's nice about Barcelona and Spain is people are really not mean to you about the language. They're not hard on you.
Right.
Like some countries, people are very unforgiving. So even though I would come in and say, speak to me in Spanish constantly to people, they, I'm sure, could understand half of what I was saying, but they never made you feel bad about it. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that speaks to why a lot of people want to live in Spain, why people like the Spanish culture, the Spanish people in general, is that they never make you feel like you don't belong in a place because you don't speak the language, or because you're learning. And I think it says a lot for the mentality here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been great too. I know a few times like I would go into a shop and I'd rehearse what I'm saying, gonna say over and over again. And I get there. And then sometimes I don't say it because I get all nervous, but other times I do. And maybe I would say it in the wrong order, the right words, wrong
Yeah.
order. And they would just politely correct me and I would apologize. And they were always just so nice, like, no, 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 it's okay in Spanish. They're always
Yeah.
like, oh, it's okay, no worries. Or even a
Yeah.
few times I would go in and speak Spanish, My Spanish is very limited, just so the listeners know. I mean, very limited. And then they would respond to me in English. And so I would think, okay, are they wanting to practice their English, or is my Spanish so bad that it's their way of just saying, just talk to us in English? It's better that way.
I think they want to. I think they want to practice too. A lot of people do anyway.
Mm-hmm. And so when you moved there, you moved with your dog. And
Yes.
so how did that process go? Because I haven't spoke with anybody who was moved with their dog. So tell us about
Yeah.
that.
I had this dog named Gibson who was very, very naughty. And he was a Shiba Inu. He was very handsome, but very naughty. And I didn't ever imagine moving without him. It was never a thing I would have even contemplated. I traveled a lot for work previously, and I always had a pet sitter come to my house and stay with him. But in this case, because he had some behavioral issues, I couldn't imagine giving him to someone. It seemed like it would be, this is a bit of like the bad ex-boyfriend. Yeah, I couldn't, no one else, would understand him. It was a
Mm-hmm.
little bit of that. But what initially I had thought, because I had previously flown with him stateside, and I didn't realize that there were different limitations because the planes are different sizes, the
Mm-hmm.
international planes. So there was a carrier size that he was small enough to go in a domestic flight. And he would go under, I'd pay $100 or whatever. He would go under the seat and I could fly with him. And I flew with him to Colorado. I think I flew with him maybe to Montana, but a couple of times I flew with him in the US.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought flying on Delta, the same airline, I shouldn't have any issue traveling to Spain. And then about a month ahead of time, I go to like call them to pay for that extra $100 add-on. And they
Mm-hmm.
say, well, the size limit is this. And I'm like, well, let me just check. I'm pretty sure this is the same carrier size, And I go check the carrier and it's not, it's substantially smaller. It's like something that only really like a Chihuahua could fit in.
Okay.
So I was like, oh boy, so now what do I do? And I went into kind of panic mode of how am I
Mm-hmm.
going to get this dog to Spain with me? He's an extremely anxious animal. Like if you put him under the flight, he'll probably have a heart attack. Like I couldn't imagine how I was going to fly with him. So I called Delta again and I was just like pleading with them about the size of the carrier and how could this be different? And at some point the lady kind of like unofficially says to me, there's this, if your animal was registered as a service and an emotional support animal, not a service animal, they're different, then we could potentially let him fly with you. But I didn't tell you that. This is just like something I've heard, so she kind of gives me this like tip. So I start
Mm-hmm.
looking into it. And emotional support animals, which I think this has changed. I think this has changed because people were really abusing it. They basically will let you take the dog on the plane in your lap. Like it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't even have to be in a carrier because you need this dog for psychological support. So
Right.
basically, this consists of you going to a doctor, telling them that you're very depressed, that you need emotional support, and various other things, at which point they give you the certificate for your dog. Does not have to be trained, does not have to do anything. That's how I got around it. I think this has changed from what I've heard from people because people started doing it
Mm-hmm.
all the time and it was getting problematic.
Yeah, I,
Um,
I believe it has changed. There is still emotional support pets, but from my understanding, the process and the eligibility and everything is substantial for the
yeah,
pet to be an emotional support pet, because you're right, people every
yeah,
pet was becoming an emotional support pet.
yeah. Yeah. And it was like, you'd paid $100 and all of a sudden your dog could fly for free on any flight. It was
Mm-hmm.
convenient during that time, but that's how I got him on the plane. As far as getting him into Spain, actually, it's funny because the customs in Spain is so different than the US. It's so, should I say, lax. There was nobody even there when I got through the baggage claim with the dog. So
Mm-hmm.
so I think the hardest part was getting through Delta because they want to check all your paperwork before they let you on the flight because they don't
Right,
want you to get sent back.
right.
And you have to get this vet certificate issued within, I don't know, 10 days of your flight, but it has to
Mm-hmm.
be like an official certified document. So you have to take him to a vet. The vet has to do this thing. You have to send it off to a government agency. They have to overnight it back to you. It's kind of a lot of paperwork
Mm-hmm.
on that side. But then when I got to Spain, I had to find someone to check his documents. Like no one was even there.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I could have just walked through, but I didn't because I thought it might matter that he was registered. I don't know that it
Mm-hmm.
would have now in hindsight, but at the it was like, funny because got my suitcases, my sister was there with me helping, got the dog, and we just start to walk through, and all of a sudden there's like no one at customs, so it's like we literally could have just walked through, but we did call someone, they checked his papers, and then that was it. And then from then on, that was the only thing I really had to do.
Oh, great. And now I know one thing that, as far as I know, that's different here that I don't think we have in Canada, unless it's maybe a newer thing in Canada, is the pet passport.
Mm-hmm.
And so that, like in Canada, we responsible owners make sure their pets are up to date on their vaccinations, but there is no I mean, I could go to my vet if I was always going to the same one and probably getting a paper filled out or printed saying that he was up to date. But it's not like they have in Spain or in Europe, the pet passport that
Yeah.
is needed to travel with your pet from country to country.
Yeah. And to that point, the pet passport, once I was here, I got that for him. But if I had had that, I wouldn't have had to do all of that other paperwork.
Right.
So once you have it, it's quite easy because it's got all the vaccines registered and like everything that needs to be official is considered official in that document. But when I
Mm-hmm.
didn't have it, I had to send off for all these other things. So I don't know if you can get it in the US without being in Europe. I had to get it at a vet here, so
Yeah,
I'm not sure if
I
I could have.
I think that is more of a European thing, where in North America, I mean, it's just it's different. They want proof sometimes of all that, but you're right. It's
Yeah.
similar type of information, but I think it's just a different way of having it here in Europe as opposed to North America.
Yeah, it's a bit more streamlined.
Hmm.
But
Oh, good. And now you've got two dogs, so they're
yes,
keeping
actually
you.
that dog is no longer with us, but there's two new dogs, yes.
Yeah, so that's great. So let's touch base on healthcare. As far as I know, you've had no problems, which is great. But how would you
Mm-hmm.
compare just kind of like the regular kind of healthcare system in Spain compared to the United States?
Well, it's funny because the United States is just so people here don't understand how expensive it is. So
Mhm.
I think this was also a huge like motivator for me to move to a socialized country. I was paying over $600 a month for a policy, and and what people don't understand is there's a deductible. So like you have to pay that every month, but every time you walk into a clinic, you pay something, and
Okay.
how much you pay monthly dictates how much you pay when you go into the clinic. But
Mm.
the normal thing would be I go to, let's say, an annual gynecologist appointment, and I'm going to pay $30 on top of the 600 I pay every month, and then I might have to do some lab work, and that lab work will also have a deductible, so it's not just included. So maybe I have to pay
Mm.
another. I mean, it's not atypical to have $1,000 lab bill when you come out of a doctor's appointment, and that the
Wow.
insurance, that's after the insurance has covered something. So it's pretty terrible. It basically really creates a mentality into people that you don't go to the doctor unless you absolutely have to. That
Hmm.
people oftentimes act as though symptoms don't mean anything because they don't want to have to pay.
Right. Well, or it's
Even,
affordability too, right? Like
yeah,
it's not like if it was just $30 or $50 to see the doctor, then
yeah,
that's fine. But if they don't have the insurance, then it's going to be substantially more,
exactly.
and it's an affordability issue.
Yeah, exactly. I think, and that's the other issue. Like to your point, if you don't have the insurance, it would be 150 or $300 to see a doctor. So
Hmm.
it absolutely creates a different mentality, which is something I've been adjusting to. But when I got here on my visa, I had to have private healthcare,
Hmm.
which I think they say about 20% of the population here has. It's not a very high percentage of Spanish people who use it.
Hmm.
um, I was under the impression when I moved here that I could only be a part of the private healthcare system, which, by comparison is somewhere between 80 and 120 euros a month. So it's substantially less, and unlike in the US, it covers everything. Like that's what you pay and that's everything.
Mm-hmm.
With some exceptions, like there's some dental exceptions, but I've actually
Right.
never paid for anything from my private healthcare here outside of my monthly premium.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that being said, my first couple of years here, I was under the false impression that I couldn't be a part of the public healthcare system. And I didn't discover that that was inaccurate until COVID came around. And I discovered that the private healthcare system actually didn't work for things like the vaccine, things like testing.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, I said to my immigration lawyers, well, I have to be a part of CAT Salute, the public healthcare system. Otherwise, I can't have a vaccine. I can't be registered as having had COVID, like things that were very important for travel mostly.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, oh, you can be a part of both. So I signed up immediately.
Mm-hmm.
And since then, so now I'm actually like dabbling in both worlds. Like I
Mm-hmm.
have my CAP, which is my healthcare center, is 5 minutes from my house. I can walk to it, which has been nice. Anything basic I would do there first, like any kind of, and this is free. Like this, it's not free because your taxes pay for it, but it's not something you pay for, right?
Right.
And when if I had a fever today, I would probably walk down to the CAP and see what's happening. How long would I wait? Probably 15 minutes, like max, or they tell me to come back later. But
Mm-hmm.
it's not, the wait times haven't been bad, with one exception. I had one time that there was a very bad wait time, but other than that, usually it's not too bad. I also, same deal with the private. If I go to, sometimes there are things that you want to have done that the public
Mm-hmm.
system doesn't cover, or you want to do some test that they don't deem necessary for public health. Like you want to do a more thorough
Mm-hmm.
exam for something. So I've done that through private healthcare, and it's been incredibly smooth. I think you'll find there's a lot less waste in the system. Like you don't have receptionists, you don't have all of these nurses. You have like one doctor who is doing everything, which
Mm-hmm.
is one thing that's been different. But you walk in, like when I was with Sanitas, which was my first couple of years in Barcelona, I used Sanitas, and the centers are all their own centers. You walk in, you register yourself. They're trying to eliminate manpower if it's not needed, to
Mm-hmm.
keep costs down. And then you would go in and you would meet directly with the doctor, and usually very quickly, in 5 minutes, you would have whatever prescription you needed or whatever. I found it to be very good. I had foot surgery my first year here. That was, like I didn't have to explain anything. It was so weird. I didn't have to fight for it. It was just like, oh,
They're like, okay, you need it. Let's do it.
yeah, which is very different. The US is always looking for an excuse not to give you care that you need.
Right.
Um, so I don't know. I found that it's a bit of a mentality shift that like, oh, you need something, just go do it because you have the care, you're covered,
Mm-hmm.
it, but it has been good. Like I think Spain's ranked very highly in healthcare systems worldwide, and I mean, aside from a few complaints, I've been to the emergency room several times, mostly with other people. It's always moved extremely fast. Like you're not in there all night. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
things like that in the US, 5, 6, 7, 8 hours later, you get
Same in
out.
Canada. And Canada's system is very similar to Spain, where we don't pay if I have to go to the hospital or the doctor, but my tax dollars pay for it. And
Right,
taxes are fairly high in Canada. But I'm
right.
also like you, where I am part of the system. I'm in the public system with my residency, and so for COVID and things like that, vaccine and all of that, I've used it for that. But I also have private insurance because when I had to apply for my residency, I had to have private insurance. To go through that process, because generally you have to have that private insurance for a year while you're going through your process. Because if something happens, they want to make sure that you're covered
Mhm.
until you become a resident. And I've just found even like an annual physical, they do, and I use the private insurance for that just because I pay for it, but they do way more stuff than I've ever had in an
Mhm.
annual physical in Canada. Like they check my heart, like EKG readings.
Mhm.
They've done ultrasound to check like my liver and my kidneys and things like that, which I mean, I'm sure in Canada, if I was having an issue, they would check, but it's an automatic. It's like part of
Yeah.
the whole process. And I mean, I was at whenever each time I go, like I'm at the doctor's office for a couple of hours, like because I'm getting so many different test work, blood work, everything, like
Hmm.
all kinds of chest x-rays, making sure my lungs are great, like, and
Hmm.
it's all included. And it's just like, oh yeah, it's the physical. Okay, now you go to this room, do this, you do this, you do this. And there's, I don't know, like 7 different rooms that I go to for all these different tests. And then about a week later, I go back and then the doctor goes through everything with
Hmm.
me, and it is substantially more thorough than the Canadian system for sure.
Yeah, and efficient. I found
Mm-hmm.
like what you're describing is why would you like in the US you would have to come back for each of those 7 things. You wouldn't do it in one day. They'd make you
Mm.
come back. Why? Because they'd bill the insurance for it every time.
Oh, right.
So if the
Yeah.
government's trying to keep the cost down because it's a cost that they're assuming in the tax bracket, right? In the
Mm-hmm.
tax scheme, well, they want it to cost as little as possible,
Right.
right? So they want to do it all at once because that costs less for them,
Right. Yeah. And it
which
makes
costs
sense
less
for
for
me.
you.
Exactly. Because I go once and
Yeah.
I just go from this room on this floor to this room, and it's all the same building, but just different areas,
Yeah.
and it's thorough and very efficient. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's been my experience too. I haven't honestly, I don't have, I mean, I think the people who are from here complain about it because they haven't seen how bad it can be on the other side.
Right.
It's
Right.
like
And
anything.
yeah, and I'm sure there are probably times with the public system that some waits are longer, and sometimes people or things kind of fall through the cracks, and that's I'm
Yeah.
sure even in the private system that there's been some people who've had some bad experiences because not everything is always going to be efficient and done well and right. But overall, I think that the healthcare system in Spain is fantastic, and I'm generally, as I said, using private, but the expense is not very much.
No, no, it's not. And you can, and I got a plan that covers me in the US as well.
Okay.
Um, which has been great because I travel to the US for work often and then I'll go
Hmm.
back and if I need to do something, well, they reimburse me, like 75% or something. So
Okay.
I pay something and then I send them the receipt and they always have, and I haven't had any issues with that. So
That's
it's been,
great.
yeah.
Yeah, mine covers me too because I travel quite a bit and it covers me. I think the clause within it though is I have to be within Spain. I can't be outside of Spain for more than 90 days in one trip. So I'm
Right.
like, well, to be back in Spain every like that's fine. It works, and it's just I guess it's just a little clause. So then some people can't say, well, I have health insurance in Spain, but I really live in
Right.
Italy or France
Right.
or somewhere else.
That
So
makes
yeah,
sense.
my um, healthcare guy told me that, and I'm like, that's fine. It's no big deal. So yeah, if I'm traveling and things like that, if something happens, then I'm still covered. So it's
Yeah.
really good and it's efficient. So I do like the healthcare system there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, what about some cultural differences have you found between the US and Spain? Because, I mean, there's a lot of differences in one aspect, but then, as we kind of talked a little bit earlier with Barcelona, there's so many people from all over that it's such a melting
Mhm.
pot. But what have you found to be some of the biggest differences that you've noticed or experienced?
Sure. I think like to what you're saying, there's so many things too when you step off the plane and you get into Spain that are so similar that it feels familiar enough that it doesn't feel like you're going to, I don't know, like somewhere in Southeast Asia or something that's perhaps much more different.
Mm-hmm.
There you see similar stores, and if it's not the store, it's something that you recognize. Like there's a lot of things that seem pretty similar
Mm-hmm.
on the surface. But I think the biggest difference to me is cultural in terms of mentality. I think this can translate to a lot of things. First of all, keeping in mind that a lot of people here don't make the salaries you make in the US. And so the emphasis on work is not there. Like, it's
Mm-hmm.
not that people don't do their jobs well. I think there's lots of great professionals here who do a great job, but the emphasis on work being your sole purpose in life doesn't exist. That's
Right.
not a priority. It's not something people understand. And in fact, I think it kind of helps keep you in check because, I came here for a reason, to leave something. And if the people were just exactly like where I came from, it wouldn't really be a change, right? But
Right.
they don't share your desire to work weekends for more money. It doesn't matter. Like, people don't really want the money. They want their weekend off. It's
Mm-hmm.
they don't want to work holidays. That's not a thing. And it's not to say people don't. There are jobs, like especially in the service industry, that require that of people, but
Right.
it's not popular. It's not something people want. It's something that's frowned upon. Free time is kind of like the most important thing. Social life is the most important thing. And then all the stuff about work is just something you do because you have to. uh so that's been a big cultural difference. I think it translates like directly when I'm working, and it's like even when I'm working with people from here, there's a different mentality about when our workday ends, and how for me it's a project based. It's like when the project's over, we're done. For them,
Mm-hmm.
they're done at this hour, and they don't want to be answering their phone again after that. um but I think that also trickles down to other things, because I think maybe what I mentioned earlier in my document was just, I think people are in the US are really crazy. And I actually kind of missed this a little bit, because you feel like in Spain, I remember one night I went to karaoke, and I went up with this girl I had just met, and I was like, do you want to sing this song with me? And I invited her up, and we did. And I remember her saying to me that she found it so crazy that I would like want to get up there and sing. She's like, I would never sing by myself, she said to me. And I was like, well, why wouldn't you sing by yourself? She's like, we're just not like that. We're not trying to be the star. Like, we're not like her friends and her,
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, yeah, that's interesting, because in the US we all think we're stars. Like, we all
Right.
think we're the next big thing. We all have enormous egos, which we constantly battle with. It's like this thing that we're bred as children to be like perfect capitalists, and to think about constantly being better, and to compete more, and to want more, and to try for to be better. And there's good and bad in that.
Right.
I think the good is, like, I feel like I have a real leg up here. Like, I feel like I can do anything, and I have that mentality.
Mm-hmm.
um I don't see my background, my past, my finances as a roadblock. Whereas here, I think people, they don't think like that. They don't need to be the best. They don't need to be a rock star, a superstar, an actress. Like, how many people in New York City are trying to be actors that are actually just waiters? I mean, like, these people have this dream that they won't let go of, even when it's ridiculous. That's
Mm-hmm.
that's America to me, and I think so like I said, there's good and bad in that. But here people don't have that complex, that God complex, that need to be the best. Yeah, some people have it, but it's not as present. And so you don't have all this craziness. You don't have all these people like Tiger King. You don't have Freeman. These people don't exist in Spain, and they never would. They never would.
Right.
It just wouldn't happen.
Right. And it's obviously there is a level of materialistic lifestyle. But I think that is a lot more coming from expats from other
Mm-hmm.
locations, because in Spain, a lot of time, as you said, they value time. Like, work
Mm-hmm.
is work. We have to work. We make money, but we want our, like, Sundays, everything is closed.
Yeah.
I mean, North America, when I was a kid, everything was closed on a Sunday, but
Yeah.
now I think even in Canada, the banks are open for a few hours on a Sunday.
Yeah.
In Spain, it's things are closed. Like, that's family time, that's break time, that's when you spend that time with your family and friends. It's not all about work. And even if a lot of them had the opportunity to work and make more money, even if it was, say, like double their pay, I would probably bet a good 90% of them would still say no. They're like,
Yeah.
I'm not working. Like, it's my day off. I'm not working. This is what I make. I budget for that, because then I enjoy my time off is
Yeah.
my time off.
Yeah. And I think you're right about the materialism. I think that that's largely brought from outside. And just as you saw, like the prices in Barcelona go up and up and up in apartment sales, and it's like that came from outsiders, that didn't come from locals.
Right.
So I think you're right. I think a lot of the services that exist, especially in Barcelona, because Barcelona you can find everything. Like you
Yes.
can find furniture, you can find anything. I do think a lot of it's catering to outsiders. Not to say that there aren't locals who have that level of taste or wanting to spend money. There are, of course, there's a lot of people who have money in this country, but not,
Mm-hmm.
the priorities are different. It's just very different. I think that's the biggest shift. And then you see it trickle down in things like a
Right.
call with a customer service center. I can't tell you how many times I've been on the phone with someone who has told me something bad about their own company. And I'm like, wait a minute, you work for
Yeah.
them. How are you saying that Movistar sucks? And they don't care. They don't care that they work for them. If they think it's wrong, they're going to tell you it's wrong, but they're not also not going to do anything about it. And like in the US, we're taught that your company is like your God, like you must be loyal to them, you must treat them
Yeah.
with respect. If you're good to them, they're good to you. And I do think that is a bit of a double-edged sword, but at the same time in the US, people make more if they do better at work.
Right.
You're rewarded for doing more work. In Spain, you're not. So people like, I'm not going to get paid more.
So why would I put in more
Right.
effort? Why would I
Right.
put in my effort, heart, soul, work all
Right.
these hours, everything, if I'm getting the same as the person next to me who's just
Right.
doing the minimum? And I understand that.
It's
It is
logical.
understandable. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's logical. But you will see that, like it's something I've noticed that you see like customer service is very different.
Yes,
It's very different.
it's very different. Especially coming directly from North America, it's very different. So I initially went from Canada to Costa Rica, where back then I don't think they knew what the word customer service was. Like
Right,
it
right,
was the worst. Like there just was no service. Like literally, you could sit at a restaurant for 4 hours without a drink. And if you didn't ask them for one, they would like, they'd come and ask you for the first one, you finish it, but you could be there for hours. And if you don't
right,
ask for another one,
right,
they won't bother you. And it kind of works both ways, because coming from Canada, I think, well, I'm here at the restaurant needs to make money. You should be continuously asking me when I'm even getting low on my drink or food or whatever else, because that's where we come from, where it's, push more stuff to up their bill so this person spends more money. Where when I was there and I would talk to them, they just said, well, if you want something, you'll ask for it,
right,
which is
right.
so simple and basic, which I kind of see both ways. But then now moving to Spain, I mean, there is more customer service than there was when I was living in Costa Rica. And maybe it's gotten better there because that was years ago now, but it's definitely not the standard of North America. But as you say, we're also not tipping. I mean,
Right,
10 is like an insult in North America. What, 20,
right.
30% now? Where if you leave a few euro on the table, they're happy with that because there's zero expectation of tip. They have their salary and wage,
Right.
where in North America, like Canada, they do get a minimum wage plus tips. But I've heard
Yeah,
that in some places in the United States, it's just tips, that they don't even get a wage, which is
yeah.
crazy.
When I was waiting tables in New York during college, that was certainly the case. I worked at one restaurant. I only made my tips. That's all I made. And I would walk away with that. And the other restaurant, I think they tried to be a little bit more above board. So I
Mhm.
would make my tips plus maybe $100 a week in cash that they would slip me an envelope every week. And it was like, because they were trying to give you that, whatever that minimum wage was, which was like $3 an hour.
Mhm.
And in New York City, that's like not a livable wage at all. And so if you have a bad day or it's raining and no one comes out, or like your table doesn't tip you because they're from Spain, you're like screwed.
Right. I have no idea where we were chatting because my computer ran out of memory space. And so we've had to make some adjustments. But you've bought a house and have done some renovations. How has that process worked? Is it similar to what you would experience in the US, or do you find it more challenging, or how How has that gone
Yeah.
for you?
So I would say, because this is now my second house that I've bought here and renovated, and I would say the first house was incredibly difficult, because you don't know anyone. And so, like even the people you're going to ask, I think one of the biggest challenges in Spain is that people here it's Pueblo culture. So in general, people go off of recommendations by people they know much more than a review on Google, right? Like they're going to ask around. So if you know someone who did a renovation with someone, it doesn't even mean they did a good job, but you'll probably call the same person because you know that person.
Right.
If you don't know anybody, like when I moved to my house in Girona, I didn't know anybody. So you'd ask the neighbors, but they don't renovate their houses. Like it's not back to consumerism. It's not a very common thing for most of the population. They're gonna do the minimum possible, and because it's a lot of time, energy, and money, and those are things that people don't want to spend on their house. A lot of people.
Right.
So a lot of that first renovation of that first house was you would call someone, you would get quotes, you would then hire someone. There is a lot of trying to figure out who you can trust. There's like starting projects that they maybe don't finish the way you want them to finish. So the first house was difficult because I was trying to do the bare minimum but still kind of end up with the house I wanted. And whenever your budget's a question, I think that was one of the things that you learn is like, obviously I think anyone who's renovated has learned that in any country, that you're going to go over budget. But the good thing was I did, through 4 or 5 contractors, finally find a team I like. So when I moved here, I did meet with some local people to do the renovating in this house, but I ultimately went back to this guy I'd used before because there was a trust there. And then I know he's not the cheapest of everyone I've worked with, but he is the most reliable and trustworthy. And even just like things, I've had people break things, not just like objects, but things within your house. Like I remember these guys in the first house tore a wall down and just like destroyed the wall in the room next to it, but had zero accountability for fixing it. Didn't want to do anything about that. Or people tell you they're going to do multiple layers on a wall I was covering of paint and things. And like you looked at it later and it was clear they'd only done one coat. And I think the first thing is they always want you not to be home. You should always be home. Like, especially if there's a language barrier, because sometimes they say a thing so quickly that you don't maybe register exactly what that means, or that word doesn't mean the same thing in English if I translate it directly. So I think you always have to be home, and you always have to know exactly what you're willing to compromise on, because a lot of people, I think this is the same everywhere, people are going to try to be lazy and do the least possible work. They're going to try to talk you out of what you actually want because it's harder. So I don't think that's unique to Spain. I think what's unique to Spain is, no, this probably not unique either. People are going to try to rip you off. They don't separate labor from materials. They tell you one price for things, but they're also like, making a lot of money on the materials, that kind of thing. I think that's also probably pretty universal, but I think it taught me a lot of vocabulary I didn't know, that's for sure. And I think that was a hard part about it, because you don't know what any of these words mean. And these people, this is a world where you're not going to find a lot of English speakers. You're not going to find a lot of people who can communicate to the same level in English, if at all. So you're going to kind of get thrown into this world of like figuring it out as you go, both what you're trying to say, what they think you mean, and where you end up, but yeah, I think now, I just put a pool in, and that was nothing short of a disaster with this company. They, like I was very specific about where the electricity and water lines to the house were. First thing they did was break them,
Oh gosh.
and then not want to have to fix it. So like they don't have a plumber, so I have to call someone. And then to get people to do the right thing financially, like to pay for that, is always a battle. So those kinds of things in the US, there's a bit more accountability because people want you to leave them a good review. They want you to come back, because people don't really care here about you coming back. They don't have that same mentality of like doing the right thing in business. And so I found that the contractors I work with now all do. They all understand that I'm a return customer. I'm going to keep coming back. I have a lot of work to do on this house. But if you
Mm-hmm.
find people, a lot of people don't. And so they don't care if you ever call them again. They're thinking about the moment. They want to make
Right.
money on you right now. And that's the hardest thing. So I think I would say if anyone was renovating here, to get renovation recommendations from expats, from people who've had to do it, because I do think, especially like if you're coming from North America, there's a different level of expectation. Um, or
Mm-hmm.
like I have a friend who's Japanese, like I know her level of expectation is extremely high, and it was very hard for her to find that here. So I think it's like getting recommendations from people who've actually worked with them, because even though every contractor is going to have their weaknesses, at least you'll know what they are.
Right. Right.
Like, oh, this person I can trust to come, or this person always shows up 2 hours late, but they do a really good job. I mean, there's always going to be something,
Mm-hmm.
but
Yeah,
yeah.
and some of the definitely, I think a lot of those problems definitely are universal. But you're right, since it's not as much of a culture where, as you said, like a lot of people aren't doing, they're not renovating, they're not repainting, they're not redoing their house every 3, 5, 7, 10
Mhm.
years. And so if somebody has a job, they're like, oh, it's like it's a one-time thing,
Yeah.
because it's not that they're building that up and thinking, oh, well, maybe I'll come back in 5 years, or in 3 years time, now they're going to renovate a different part of their house, or
Yeah.
something like that. So
Yeah, that's definitely the biggest difference. And I think that goes across the board, but definitely you notice it more in renovating, because,
mhm.
in a store, there's some rules, there's some norms that the government, like gives you a 2-year guarantee that something has to last. There are things like that.
Right.
Once you let someone in your home and you're just working with freelance people, it's not the same. Like you don't have these same levels of protection, or if you do, it's harder to navigate.
Right.
So the biggest thing is a lot of people are not thinking about the future, and
Mhm.
they don't treat you with that in mind. So you just have to kind of know that.
Right. Great. All right. One last question.
Mhm.
If somebody was considering moving abroad, whether it was to Spain or somewhere else in the world, what's one piece of advice that you would give them?
Hmm. One piece of advice. Well, I think if you're coming from the US,
Hmm.
I would say you should definitely get out. If you're if you're
And
coming
I
from
can help
somewhere
them with
else,
that. I can help them with all that
yeah,
planning, with
yeah.
diversifying everything and making sure things are set up. So that's a good piece of advice.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think there's, I mean, depends on which country you're going to, of course, but
Hmm.
getting out of the US and understanding that there is another world out there is something not a lot of Americans do, but I think should do.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Excellent. Well, thank you very much for your time and sharing your experiences and your stories with our listeners, and hopefully it helps them navigate their journey wherever it may be, and however it may work for them.
Awesome. Thank you.